Karl Marx and Marxism, communism, they are all stains on human history.
All right, dude. Let's hear it. What you got to say?
Marx was Jewish, even though he spread anti Semitism to hundreds of millions of people for the past 150 years.
Wow, I didn't know Karl Marx lived up to see more than 150 years. But real talk, this is the assertion that Marx spread anti-Semitism or was it any way anti-Semitic at all is not true to begin with. The source this talking point that Marx was anti-Semitic comes from was from Marx's piece of work called On the Jewish Question that he published. And the background for this piece was the book itself was a response to Bruno Brauer, who was basically a liberal who wrote a piece about how Jews could achieve emancipation in Prussia at the time. And in Marx's response, beforehand, what Brauer argued was that Jews basically had to relinquish their specifically Jewish consciousness to achieve equal rights, and a secular state was necessary. Basically, what Brauer was advocating for or arguing for was for particular religious demands being incompatible with the secular state that granted human rights in the first place. And when Marx released On the Jewish Question, he used it as a way to critique liberal assumptions about the state and its relation to religion. Marx argued that the secular state with its regime on human rights wasn't opposed to religion, but rather presupposed to it. When the state removes religious or property qualifications for citizens, this doesn't mean the abolition of religion or property, but rather it abstracts from the particular religious or economic features of individuals. What Marx tries to do here is move beyond begging the bourgeoisie state for political and spiritual freedom to explaining the basis of real economic emancipation.
Constantly complained about how and why he was always broke. And it was never his fault. It was always society's fault. He couldn't take responsibility that he was just a failure with no self-control.
When it comes to reading Marx and Marx's literature, you have to understand that there's Marx as a person and Marx analysis. Marx as a person, we could have lengthy debates about who he was as a person, but Marx's analysis is amoral. He does not make any moral statements about capitalism or whatever he's talking about in any work of his literature. So a common mistake most people who read Marx's work is that they tend to read him more ideologically and not historically. The foundation of Marxist ideology are the two concepts of historical materialism and dialectical materialism. Historical materialism being that the idea that the motor of human development and society is class struggle, where all human phenomena has their basis in material conditions, the economic development of society, and the modes of production and exchange. These are what are considered the driving forces of all historical events, according to Marx. So when it comes to reading about any of Marx's analysis of whatever he's talking about, there are no personal beliefs being interjected into his writing. Instead, they are taken from historical events that he either studied or read about. So, when reading Marx, his personal life or however he behaved in public does not disqualify anything he's ever talked about.
Even though Marx was a weak-minded charlatan with no self-control, that doesn't mean he wasn't very intelligent, nor was he a bad writer or communicator. He enmeshed that with the idea of class struggle, which is a valid thing. The notion of the cure for that was a violent and bloody revolution, which of course tapped into a lot of the popular anger at the time. He also enmeshed anti-Semitism. There are so many quotes from this man about how Jews are behind the evil of capitalism.
Literally, where did he say that?
We'll see Marxists to this day justifying genocide, or at least turning a blind eye to how the Jews were horribly mistreated as a result of this man.
Literally, which Marxist justified the genocide of Jews?
Even though Marx's work is very compelling, it is not rooted in reality. I've read the Communist Manifesto. I have read Das Kapital. It took months. But Marx and Marxists, socialists, communists, they're lying to themselves about the innate tendency of human nature.
Anti-communists and human nature. Name a more iconic duo. I honestly had a feeling you were going to bring this up sooner or later, so I might as well try and talk about this now. When an anti-communist brings up the concept of human nature when debating communism in general, saying that communism could not work because of human nature, what they're essentially trying to imply is that humans have this innate selfishness in them that forces human beings to exploit and each other. And to me, this is pretty loaded in a way. But then when an anti-communist brings this up, it's usually as a cop-out most of the time, because it has no real thought put into it once you think about it. Because think about this. When you live under a mode of production, like capitalism for instance, that rewards selfishness and competitive self-interest rather than social or altruistic gains, then you're going to breed a society of sociopathic, self-interested, and selfish individuals. Biologically speaking, humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. And before we had farming in general, what we had was a hunter-gatherer society, one Frederick Engels called primitive communism, that functioned under primitive communism, where people just had to look after each other because that's what it took to survive. So, in that sense, empathy was rewarded for survival of the human race at that point in time, before the mode of production of farming came into place. And this empathy spared humanity from the savagery of might makes right. Now, when you take that into consideration, you would reasonably come to the conclusion that it's economics that's the basis of human nature in the first place. The material conditions of a man will determine the actions he will take to secure his daily bread. If I am a man and I want my daily bread and I decide to go fish or pick some berries, that will construct my worldview.
Marx and Marxists are under this delusion that the same people who can manage a bloody and violent overthrow of the government, or the system that is, can then, once the horrible stuff has happened, return to normal and start doing what is right, instead of filling the vacuums of power with the most narcissistic sociopaths.
Mr. Madison, what you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
Okay, a simple wrong would have done just fine, but
You remain one.
Our assertions for incentive to sophisticated labor are for the betterment of man. That is not how humankind works. That is not capitalism's fault. That is evolution. You will.
What? So we're genetically evolved to innovate things for profit? Is that what you're trying to imply here? Because that's what you're implying. You do know people did things before capitalism, right? Where there was no profit and incentive to do anything at all. And this is not me trying to say that work or any type of research or discovery was done for free. Obviously, some research may have been commissioned by some feudal lord somewhere, but the idea that human innovation is dictated by profit motive is not an efficient way of doing this sort of thing if it's for the profit motive.
See this. Marxists do not have a basic understanding of how the real world works.
What does that even mean when you say we don't have an idea of how the real world works? What do you mean by that? Because a lot of Marxist authors after Marx himself, their literature, a lot of their literature is based on the foundational Marxist concepts I talked about: historical materialism, dialectical materialism. Their work has to follow the logic of what history has presented beforehand to what has led us to the present, because that's all it is. Historical materialism and dialectical materialism and history in general is not some isolated event. There are sequences in history that lead from one to the other into the present day. So the past and the history we came from will always dictate how we live the present now. So to say that we don't know anything about the real world makes no sense. Gosh, this was a long video. But anyway, thank you guys for watching this video and joining me on this watch through. If you like this content, this is my first political video ever, so if you liked and you want to see more of it, please feel free to hit the like button, comment, and subscribe, y'all. Thanks.